Hey y'all, in this video I'm going to give you a brief overview of the mount that I made to mount the rotary axis on my Gatton CNC. Then I'll go through the steps that I took to mount a piece of material in the rotary axis, then set my X, Z, and A axis zeros. Then we'll go through and we'll cut my very first part. So if you want to follow along, stick around. Okay. A quick overview of the mount. What I did was I put a piece of kiln-dried 2x6, just screwed it to the bottom of the frame. I then took just standard 3/4 MDF, cut everything to size, and I gave it all 3 coats of shellac-based sanding sealer. I then put down a layer of MDF here on the bottom, right on top of the 2x6. Then another layer up here on top, and it's all spaced out 3/4 of an inch away from the front of the face frame. Then I cut a piece of MDF here and these strips of MDF here, and I have these pieces of T-track. Now when I ordered the T-track for the table itself, I ordered a couple of extra pieces for this purpose. And these 2 pieces here are for the headstock. They're actually drop off from when I cut these pieces, these shorter pieces of T-track here. I have one screwed here, and they're spaced apart wide enough so that my headstock mounts on here. They're facing in this direction simply so I can take a bolt, insert it into the T-track, then mount my headstock on it, put 2 more bolts in for the front, take my wrench, tighten everything down. These run this direction here so that the tailstock will sit down on top of the MDF but fasten down with more 1/4-20 bolts. But I can slide this back and forth and position it where I need it when I go to adjust my tailstock for whatever length of piece I'm going to be cutting on. Now, the T-track down here on this end stops 3/4 of an inch away from the frame, and that's just to give me space to put the bolts in. Like so. And that's all there is to this mount. I'm not giving any specifications or measurements simply because your mount may differ. Your rotary axis kit may differ. But that's a brief overview. Setting it up takes only a couple of minutes, and I'll show you that in a fast forward sequence right now. And here is the project that I'm going to attempt to recreate. Now this is a simple spinning wheel spoke, but as you can see, I have some here that have seen better days. I've got a total of 5 of them I need to recreate, and they all need to be pretty consistent. So that's where the rotary axis is really going to shine. It's doing those boring, repetitive cuts that would drive a person running a traditional lathe up a tree. So let's get set up and let's get cutting. Okay, here I am in my standard setup for use with the standard 3-axis, X, Y, and Z. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my gantry forward and 0 my Y. Bear with me for a couple of seconds. I'm going to be throwing Y and A around back and forth here a little bit. Okay? So what I'll do is I took my calipers here and I measured the width of the housing. The center of the spindle lines up directly with the center of this housing right here. I measured the width, divided by 2, and measured out and marked the center point of my spindle right here on the housing. So what I want to do now is bring my Y forward and I have a 90-degree V-bit chucked in my router. Now, I could just as easily use a 60-degree or 30-degree, whichever, but what I want is I want a bit with a point here, because I'm going to line up the gantry with that line so that the router is setting right at the center of my spindle in the rotary axis. So I'll bring you in closer so you can see what I'm doing there. Okay, now let's bring that bit over, and I'm going to have to get my big fat head in the middle of the way here on occasion. How close I am in X doesn't really matter. I do need to bring my Z down though. Pretty close, but not quite touching. Okay, now I'll go into single step mode here and bump it in one step at a time. Okay, now I have my Y. The gantry is moved forward to where the tip of that bit is aligned with my little index mark on my axis housing. Now I'm going to shut off the control box. Okay, now with the control box shut off, it's safe for me to go ahead and unplug my Y-axis and plug in my A-axis. I can now also turn off this Mach 3 profile and load up the rotary axis profile I made in the last video. It's now safe for me to go ahead and turn the control box back on. I have my Y-axis, you can't see it. I have my Y-axis unplugged, my A-axis, the rotary axis, is plugged in. It's now safe for me to go ahead, turn the control box back on, and I'm ready to start using the A-axis. The gantry will not move. I'm now ready to chuck a piece of material in and set my Z, A, and X zeros. Okay, when it comes to a system for mounting stock in the material and getting everything in alignment, I don't really have one. So I'm kind of inventing one as I go along here. So if you're used to using a rotary axis and you have some tips, tricks, or ideas for me, I'm a willing taker. Contact me through my website or leave a comment in the comment section down below. Now, one thing I do know is that I've got to find the center of my piece of material here on the end so I can get it lined up with the point on my tailstock, my live center. So I take my handy dandy high speed, low drag, everybody needs one, center finder, locate it on my material, strike a line, rotate it 90 degrees, strike another line, and there I go. Link to one of these in the description box below. It's really a cool little tool. So I'll slip it into the chuck. Okay, I'm not snugged super tight. I've just got it being held here. Because now what I got to do is I've got to make sure I'm lined up with my gantry axis travel. When I made my spoil board, I cut these ends off with the X-axis. So I know the end of my spoil board is parallel with the axis travel of my router. So I take my machinist rule, get my big fat head right in the middle of the road here, and I'll measure from the edge of the table to the face of the material here and down here. And when I have them straight, I know that I'm straight this way. I'll then measure from the bottom here down to the top of the mount and adjust. And when I have that straight, I know I am straight tightened into the chuck. I'm going to do something that's very counterintuitive. I now know that my piece of material is straight in my chuck. Let me tighten it down, double check it. That didn't need much. Now I'm going to move my tailstock out of the way and set my Z0. Okay, I've swapped that V-bit out for a 1/4 inch ball nose. This entire project is going to be cut with this one bit, this 1/4 inch ball nose. Now I'm going to bring it over and I'm going to set my Z0 first. I know it's counterintuitive, but that's the way it gets set up. Z0 first. Now there are two ways you can zero your rotary axis. When you're drawing up your design in V-carve, Aspire, whichever, at the very beginning of the process, when you get into the rotary wrapping, it asks you, are you going to set your Z0 to the top of the material, or are you going to set your Z0 to the center of rotation? In this file, I set it to the center of rotation. So what I'm going to do now is set my Z to the center of my material right here. So I want to bring the tip of this bit down to where it's lined up with the center of my material down here, then go over into Mach 3 and hit my Z0 button next to my ZDRO. So let's get into position. And my Z, the bottom of this bit, is lined up with the center of those crosshairs. So now I can go over here and set Z0, click, and I'm set. Now I can bring my tailstock up, line it up with that center mark, make sure I square it up to the table, and tighten it down. Okay, now I can just make sure my spindle is loose back here and tighten up my tailstock. And now I have a nice firm connection. The tip of my tailstock is driven into the material roughly 1/16 of an inch, enough to hold it steady. Now I can tighten down the spindle lock on it and make sure my handle is pointing down so it's not sticking up here and getting in the way should my router come over this far. Now I'm ready to set my x-axis here, 0. And the way I'm going to do that is dependent on the part that I'm going to cut. I know, for instance, that my part that I want to cut out of this 12-inch piece of material is about 10 inches long. Now I want to keep this bit away from the chuck. I'm going to come in, I'm not going to measure 6 inches in and strike a mark to line up with. I'm going to come over to about 6 3/4. If my bit should come off of the end of the piece of material, that way it doesn't hit a chuck jaw, it will come up over the top of my live center. We'll see if that makes any sense. So I'm going to come over here, get my pencil, and there we go. Now I'll just line up the bit with that mark I just made and set my x-axis 0. Okay, when it comes to setting the 0 on my A-axis, I really need a better system than this. So any of you folks who are more experienced with the rotary axis than I am, I could use your help here. What I'm doing right now is I've got a small level, and actually I need a machinist level for this, because they're a lot more accurate. I put a small level on one of the chuck jaws here, and adjust my A. There we go. There we go. Now that I have my chuck running perfectly horizontal and level, those jaws anyway, I can go over here to Mach 3 and 0 my 4th axis. So I have my X0 set, I have my Z0 set, I have my A0 set. Now I'm ready to go ahead and load some G-code and run this part. And here it is, the finished project. Overall, I'm very, very happy with the result. Now, it is straight off of the machine. I have done no sanding at all, and there are some machine marks here, but that's to be expected. I've got 4 more of these to cut, and again, this is not the final material I'm going to use, but I've got a couple more pieces. I'm going to continue to practice my setup, and when I feel confident, when I think I've got it, I'll go ahead and pick some appropriate material to go ahead and cut for the final project. Overall, though, I'm very, very happy with the results. So, those are the steps that I took to recreate this spinning wheel spoke. Now, as I said, this is my first time using this, the first complete project I've done with a rotary axis, so I still have a lot to learn. So any of you folks out there that are real experienced with setting up a rotary axis, I'd love to hear from you. Leave comments down in the comments section, and I'll get in touch. Now, I've left links in the description box below, one to the center finder that I showed you a little bit earlier, and to the website article that's going to accompany this video. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to put them in the comments section. If you need to get a hold of me for something, head over to my website, sponsored by Harneal Media, and hit the Contact Us page. Shoot me an email, and we'll talk. For everybody else, I hope you got something out of this video of value. If you did, leave me a comment, and throw me a thumbs up down there. Each of those thumbs up really does make a difference. If you'd like to follow along with my further CNC adventures, consider hitting that subscribe button and that little bell right next to the subscribe button. That way you'll get a notification every time I post a new video. So, I'd like to thank everybody very, very much for taking the time to watch this video, and y'all take care.